We want to talk about 7 qualities of leading an oikocentric church. Or there's an alternate title to this presentation, 7 qualities of an oikocentric life. There is nothing that we want our church to reflect that should not be reflected in the individuals who attend it. The reason that High Desert Church is an oikocentric church is because it is made up of a significant number of oikocentric people. And no matter what we call ourselves, we're an outwardly focused church. Not if you don't have outwardly focused people. We're a discipleship church. Not if you don't have disciples. We're a church who cares for people. Not if your people don't care for people. Because they set the bar. They determine what kind of church you are. Why do we elevate these principles of an oikocentric church? Because these are the principles of an oikocentric life. And if we can just generate enough of this in the individual experiences of a critical mass of people, we can tip the trajectory of this ministry the direction that we think it ought to go. Is everybody at HDC living an oikocentric life? The answer is no, but enough are. We pick up a few now and again, and a few drop by the wayside, but I think we've gradually established a pattern of gradually developing momentum in the right direction. Let me give you 7 ideas. And then what we're going to do is allow you to break into your teams, and some of you came alone, some came with just maybe one other. We have a couple of churches represented here that have, a lot of folks, so we're going to make different rooms available to you because before the Q&A, as we close the day, we'll close it with a Q&A. But we want to give you an opportunity just to have a conversation with your team about how your church or you perceive your church to score in each of these 7 areas. So, number 1, the oikocentric church thinks exponentially. The oikocentric church thinks exponentially. The Bible says that the impact we have in life usually lasts only 4 generations. That's it. Down through our children, our grandchildren, to our great-grandchildren. You see, if Cheryl and I are generation 1, that means our 3 children and their spouses are generation 2, and our 6, soon to be 7, I'm sure will be more grandchildren, will be generation 3. And as God allows us the opportunity to live a long life, which we hope, obviously, He would be so gracious, we might have an opportunity to speak into the lives of our great-grandchildren. We probably will never, ever, ever meet our great-great-grandchildren. It's possible, but even if it happens, we're going to be like so old, it won't matter. I mean, they're going to look at us like, okay, is he still alive, Grandma? The point is, that's why the Bible says 4 generations. And what is unique, I could write as many books as I wanted to write about what's important to me, and my great-great-grandchildren could read about what I think has value. They could hear testimonies from, Grandpa and great-grandpa about what great-great-grandpa had in his life that was important. What would be lacking? Relationship. You guys, that whole idea of the sins of the fathers breaks down to the 3rd and even the 4th generation is a testimony to relationships. It is a tribute to the power of example in a relationship. Now, on the negative side, those numbers are a warning to us. Don't screw up your life or you're going to affect in a negative way 4 different generations. But on the positive side, they give us an indication of how much potential we have, how our lives can impact people with these generational ripples. And they also answer the question as to why Jesus chose the oikos as a tactical approach to building His church. Simply put, multiplying people changes the world faster than adding people. He invented math. What can I say? Now, seeing our relational world as encompassing 8 to 15 people, it does not mean that those are the parameters of our potential impact. For example, we would say, well, you got 8 to 15 people in your life, and someday you're going to die, and there might be 8 to 15 people there who will have been impacted by your testimony. No, that generational ripple thing kind of catches on, and the numbers grow significantly. See, when we talk about 8 to 15, we're talking about 8 to 15 people at a time. Let's say you're a Christian for a while. Let's say that you, like me, grew up in a Christian family, and at some point early in adulthood, you got serious about your faith and perpetuating faith through this idea of exponentiality, and so you began to impact those 8 to 15. And then some of them, remember we told you, keep it current. Some of them kind of moved out, some new ones moved in. So over the course of a lifetime, you might have had a significant impact on upwards to 100 different people. Now let's say that of those 100 people, we're just going to cut in half the number, not cut the people in half, that would be gross. We're going to cut the number in half, and you got 50 people. 50 of those 100, you have had what you had hoped to have with 100 of them. But it only worked out for 50. Remember, Jesus only got 11 of the 12, and maybe your ratios aren't going to even be as good as his, which I kind of would expect. And so 50 people. You had a first generational impact in their lives. But then let's say that that same thing took place for them. And for a third generation and a fourth generation. What would that look like? You know, that's what we call, or what I have called, I say we call, I don't know if anybody else calls it this is what I call your personal impact analysis. Because if you, the first generation, added 50 people, in each generation, for 3 more, for 4 generations, you're the one, plus 50, plus 50, plus 50. What do you got? You got 151 people. You guys, there are 7 billion people in the world. I mean, we got to move a little more quickly than this. Which is why exponentiality is the approach Jesus brings to the table. You see, when you look at the rock dropping in the water and ripples just kind of waving outside of that first impact, those ripples gradually become exponentially larger. And now you, the first generation, multiplied 50 people out over the next 3. So you start with 51, you and the 50, times 50, times 50. What do you end up with? 151 or 127,500 people? Do you see how these numbers can start to add up? And that is precisely why Christ Church grew so quickly over time. The rapid rise of Christianity in the West. I mean, his tactic was clear from the beginning of his earthly ministry. It took 18 centuries, 1,800 years for evangelicals to grow from 0% of the world's population, and it really wasn't 0 because Jesus was 1. So, you know, we got a little number in there. It's pretty close to 0. From 0% to 2.5% of the world's population, 1,800 years. Would you like to receive Christ? Yeah? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, baby. It's a problem. Cheryl is my wife. Whenever she comes up here, nobody's looking at me, right? So we got to... Thank you. Is that better for you guys? You. One time I walked into church on a Saturday night to speak. She hates to be the center of attention. She is in the back all the time just supporting and praying. But I had my sunglasses on as I walked in the room, and I just flipped them up on top of my head. I never took them off. So I walked up to speak at church, my sunglasses up. Halfway through the message, I see Cheryl coming down. And I'm thinking, you know what, did I miss our anniversary? What happened? And she comes up and she grabs my sunglasses off my hand. Before she leaves, she turns to the congregation and says, "Was that bugging anybody else?" And everybody said, "Yes, it was bugging us." So whenever I see you come up, I know, oh, something's wrong. All right, what was I talking about? 1,800 years. 18th century, go from 0 to 2.5% of the world's population. You know how long it took to go from 2.5% to 5%? 70. You know how long it took to go from 5% to 10%? 22. Now keep in mind, when Jesus left, this is great. When Jesus left to return to the Father, you know, a few minutes ago, we talked about the 120 people that were followers of Christ. And Jesus said, the next step for you is just don't leave town. And they met together and they prayed. That's Acts 1. And then Acts 2, of course, the lid blew off the whole church, and things started to really pick up some serious momentum at that point. But we had 120 believers at the time of Christ, which means, because there were about 200 million global residents 2,000 years ago in the world. And what does Jesus say? The Great Commission. Go get the world, the whole world. And nothing but the world, so help me God. That's what he said. So we're going after 200 million people, which meant if you had 120, there was less than one Christian for every 1,667,000 people. You talk about an oikos. You are now responsible for 1,667,000 people. I mean, you're struggling to figure it out with 8 to 15. Now today, there are 35 times more people in the world, 7 billion people, than there were 2,000 years ago. But instead of, and by the way, 1,667,000 is a lot more than 15. But now, with 35 times more people, there is one evangelical Christian. I'm not talking about people who say, yeah, my mom was born in the back pew of the church and I'm a Christian, or I was born in America and I'm a Christian. These are evangelical believers who claim to have a personal faith in Christ. There's one for every 10 people on the planet. How did that happen? Baby steps. Bob. And by the way, 10, a little bigger than 8, a little smaller than 15. You know, we are one oikos step away from taking over the whole joint. One step away. But, we do have to go to our leadership conferences. Okay? All right. No other religion on earth has spread as widely as Christianity. Only Christianity has adherents among every one of the world's 238 countries. There are at least some Christians in about 11,500 of the world's 12,600 ethno-linguistic people groups. Christians speak about 12,500 of the world's 13,500 distinct languages. And the tide continues to rise every day. Remember what Jesus said to the fellas? I think I'm going to build a church. And I don't think the gates of Hades can stop us. Prophet Jesus. Building a culture of exponentiality, building the psyche of multiplying things in a church isn't easy. In hindsight, it's been interesting to track how exponentiality has influenced our ministry from the very beginning. And yet we look back. The first time we wanted to introduce exponentiality into our church was when we said, let's start a second service. It was in this building. You could fit about 125 people in here without, feeling like you were, all packed into a sardine can. And so it was just a matter of a couple of months that we had to go to a second service. I still remember the conversations. But then we won't see everybody. And when did that become a value? It's funny because as soon as the church left Jerusalem in Acts 8, the argument to remain at one service went out the window. Which being interpreted means that 2,000 years before you began the discussion about whether or not to start a second service, the discussion became irrelevant. And by the way, you don't add a worship service. And if that's the way you want to describe it, then that's your problem. You don't say, hey, how about we add a worship service? Because Jesus doesn't use addition. He says, how about we multiply our potential impact in this community by 2? And now you got something going on. And if you have an auditorium that seats 200 people and you plan to fill it twice, you did not go from a ministry of 200 to 400. You went from a ministry, because how many people is in an oikos? 8 to 15. You went from a ministry to 3,000 people with only a 200-seat auditorium to a ministry to 6,000 people. It's all in the way we describe it. You think people can, in your little 200-seat auditorium, if that's what you have, you think people can get jacked up about immediately being able to impact 6,000? You can catch fish if you want to. But if you want to follow me, we'll change the world. And they did. And then I remember the time we went to the adults at HTC and said, I'm sorry, we're going to have to disband all the adult Sunday school classes. And I lived to tell about it, right? You know, that's like a vocational suicide for a lot of people in my business. You know why it worked with me? Because all of those people already understood exponential thinking, and they already understood the mission of the Oikos. And this is the thing. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to go to small groups. Why are we going to go to small groups? Because, you know, we have like 5 classrooms. And we've got like, you know, 300 or 400 families. You tell me, where's the impact? But we love our Sunday school class. Okay. I would rather change the world than go to a Sunday school class. And if I need to apologize to you for that attitude, I'm sorry. It just seems like it's a higher value. I don't know. It's just me. And then we talked about different generational venues. We talked about having I remember talking to a pastor locally here, and I said, well, what kind of ministry do you have or want? And he said, I envision, you know, all these different generations all coming together and just praising the Lord. I said, dude, what you're talking about sounds all like heaven. He said, yeah. I said, this isn't heaven. I mean, this is the high desert. It's hot here. But how will the young people ever benefit from the wisdom of the older ones? No, we can figure that out. We talked about multiple worship teachers. I mean, even right now, as I speak, brothers and sisters, there's a group, about 12 guys, meeting over there in the north side upstairs of the auditorium at a teaching meeting. And this is the way it works. We have a teaching team, and then each of the leads teaches live at the alternate sites 5 or 6 times a year. Each of them has a worship leader who is on the staff to provide worship in each of those sites. And then we have communications personnel who generate video support and other kinds of communication support for our presentations we used to call sermons. So they're all meeting to figure out what they're going to do next weekend. Multiple worship teachers. Whoever is teaching will generate a transcript. And this is the unique thing. I'm teaching next weekend, but I'm not there for the conversation because I'm here with you. But if I was there, they would be addressing the transcript, 5 or 6 page transcript that I had provided to at least get the conversation going about how we're going to teach through Hebrews chapter 1, 5 through 14 next weekend. And then they have at it, and they tell me what they think, and it's not always flattering. And they'll say, Tom, this will never work. Oh, why not? And they give me ideas that are better than the ones I came up with. And then sometimes they give me an idea, and I say, that's a dumb idea. And they say, okay, you're the senior pastor. I say, okay. Well, still a dumb idea. And we talk, and we joke, but there's great support. It actually is a great team-building experience. But the point is there's a very high level of honesty. Multiple worship teachers. But what if the pastor that we like the most isn't teaching this weekend? They'll call the office. Who's teaching this weekend? It doesn't matter. Well, it matters to me. Well, that's because you're wrong. Because it doesn't matter. See, there are always those voices pushing back at us. But what do we do with multiple teachers? Number one, it's like an insurance policy for the church in case I die tomorrow. Then at least half the time, people are used to hearing guys that are going to show up. I can't because I'm with the Lord. Or There could just be a variety of reasons why it's just a valuable thing to have multiple teachers. I have often said High Desert Church is not the largest church, as you can figure that out in terms of the data. I do believe it's one of the healthiest. And part of the burden of teaching responsibilities is shared by other teachers. And you say, well, is there a good reason to do that? Well, I think I have a lot of good reasons. If nothing else, though, it teaches the church family the value of exponentiality, because we are now multiplying the effectiveness we have in teaching multiple times over, multiple campuses. But now we won't even not only see them at the same service, they won't even be on the same campus. And when did that become a value? I'm sorry. It's okay. Why do we have multiple campuses? Because as I invite someone, as Scott invites Josh to come to church, doggone it, you need to come one of these days, Josh, because Scott is like going to stop inviting you. If Josh says to Scott, I live over on the other side of town, and I just don't want to make the drive, then it is up to us. It's incumbent on us to figure out a way to go to where Josh is. We do not, by the way, when we started launching these sites, we went to the congregation and we said, this is not for your convenience. Why would we do this for your convenience? You already drive here. I mean, we talk about having a simple church. I will tell you, that's one of our points here of the 7, simplicity. Multi-site is like the least simple thing you could ever do in your life. It is. It is a very difficult animal to manage. And we're doing it as simply as we possibly can. But, the easiest thing in the world would be to not have but one site. Life got really hard when we went to 2, and then 3, and then 4. It's out of control. Why do we do that? Because you've got 8 to 15 people, that's why. And I promised you, I would do whatever I could to facilitate your mission to them. Multiple evangelists. Well, how many evangelists do we have at High Desert Church? All of them are evangelists. You don't want to call the pastor because you don't know the Bible well enough to answer someone's questions? Okay, that's good, because you need to answer their questions. You need to answer their questions. Well, how am I going to answer their questions? Well, we got a class for you. You've been praying for these guys. What are you thinking? They're going to ask questions you already know the answer to? I mean, are you serious right now? They're going to ask questions you have no idea how to answer. You need to go to the class before they ask them. And it meets this week. HTC, Exponential. And it's really hard for us at times to think that way. But it's important, because what's the objective? Save the lost. That's the objective, always been the objective. Number 2, Oikos-centric church has both a simple structure and a simple process designed to fulfill a clearly stated purpose. Now, we wrote this before we started multi-site, because I'm the only one laughing in the room. I shouldn't even be laughing. I should be crying. This is it can be so frustrating. But we tell our guys, I got some of the site leaders here, we will figure this out. It is going to be a challenge. It's going to be a Herculean effort. Some of the conversations may not always be as easy as we wish they were, but I promise you, hang in there, we'll figure it out, and we will. And it will become much more simpler in time. But James made a statement that should actually frame each one of our ministries. This is what he said next, 15:19. We should not make it difficult for the Gentiles who are turning to God. And the leaders of the Jerusalem church had a big problem. They were like you and me. That's their problem. And that they always kind of migrated toward complexity. That's what happens when we lose our focus. We get caught up in so many other things. And ministry becomes more difficult than it needs to be. And that's a dangerous trend. And I love what the apostle says. The apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. He says, but I'm afraid. I love it when the apostle is afraid, because I know what that feels like. He said, I'm afraid, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness. Deception. I'm afraid that your minds will be led astray from the simplicity and purity of devotion to Christ. You know that the Christian faith is a very simple idea. It's not easy to pull off, but it's very simple. And it's very pure. And we have an enemy who is trying to do what? Trying to lead us astray. And to become something that Jesus never intended his church to be. And those words are a warning to me. 2,000 years later, we still migrate toward complexity. You cannot do everything. You can't. You can't be all things to all people. You can't. Okay, having come to that understanding, what are you going to do? You can do a lot of things, but you can only do a few things well. And that's why you focus on your strengths and you delegate the rest. You engage your strengths and leave the rest up to somebody else. You know, if somebody were to say to me, Tom, do you want to lead the whole Victor Valley to Christ? I mentioned this in relationship to Hesperia. I say, no, I don't want to lead the whole valley to Christ. I'm tired. You know, when I say I'm tired of leading people to Christ, it's not like I'm not energized to keep doing it. I'm just saying it is exhausting. But you can multiply the number of people who attend our church, multiply it by 8 to 15. That's how many people I want to see walk with Christ. You say, well, does God love anybody else? Does God love the rest in the high desert? Absolutely. I'm just so thankful that he's got those other pastors working on that end. Because this is what God has given me. And it needs to be simple. We've got a visual in your outline. It's a palm tree. And we try to visualize things in a manner that is going to help people really see how simple church can be or should be. We have a purpose. Purpose is preparing every generation to change their worlds for Christ. That's our purpose. No matter how old you are, you got 8 to 15, I want to see that world transformed. And God's going to use you to do it, and I guess he wants to use me to prepare you to be used to do it. So that's the purpose. Everything, and the reason it's the root of the tree, nothing gets into the tree that doesn't go through the root. Remember I told you the story about the Jesus videos. The reason that got no traction at HTC is because it couldn't get through the root. That was not an oikocentric approach to world change. And then you got the trunk of the tree. You got values. We have 4 values: truthful, helpful, durable, and enjoyable. The Bible is true. We teach it as if it is authoritative. We want to help people connect dots between the scriptures and their daily lives. We want to last. Durability, very important commodity to church. And the way we have a durable church is we've got durable marriages. We've got durable families. We've got durable relationships. We want to build durability into our church family. And then enjoyable. We don't think anything should not be enjoyable. If it's not enjoyable, we shouldn't do it because of the middle syllable in the word. It's joy. What is attractive? Joy. What is not attractive? Grumpy Christians. Those are our values, and we will actually frame. That's how our purpose is framed, within the context of those values. I'm not saying they should be your values. I don't care what your values are. I'm just saying that your values need to, in a practical way, frame what you're trying to accomplish. And so you've got those core values. What's the goal? World change, to bear fruit. To bear fruit. You can't see the fruit on the palm tree there, but it's hanging up there. The process. To prepare people. And we have 3 meaningfuls. We'll talk a little about that in a few minutes. Meaningful worship, meaningful relationships, and meaningful roles. And that's it. How many things does HDC do? Not many. Actually, we have boosters. This is the thing. We want to prepare people to change their worlds for Christ, but there are some things that are so overwhelming to an individual or family that they can't even think about even making out an Oikos card, frankly. And there are elements in life that are just debilitating. There are addictions that are debilitating. Marriage issues. Systemic, deep marriage dysfunction. That's overwhelming to a family. Financial debt, overwhelming to a family. There's an anger problem. People are angry. I mean, we're supposed to. One of our core values is joy. Why do we have those 4 core values as a church? Because we believe those should be the 4 core values of every Christian's life. And if enough people have those 4 core values, our church will have those 4 as core values. So if you have somebody with an anger problem, are they going to be able to bring their oikos into the fold? Their oikos will avoid them like the plague. So what do we have to help them do? You got to get over your anger problem. Actually, if you look in your little folder, you'll see a life path sheet. And that life path sheet details, to some degree, at least it doesn't detail much, it just gives you the sense of what the class involves. And you'll notice the kind of person that we believe has the best potential to change their world. And those are the classes that we provide. People say you got worship service, you got small groups, and then discover what your gift is and get involved in ministry in a worship service or a small group. And that's all you do? Yes, except for these classes. We call them terminal classes, not because you will die if you take them, but they're not open-ended. They don't go on indefinitely. These aren't small groups. Some of them are 3-week regimen, a 6-week, a 12-week regimen, but we have tried to detail the elements of life that are so problematic it keeps people from wanting to be a world changer. Those are the boosters. And then you've got campus outreach. We call that exposure, Oikos events. The men in our church have an Oikos event. This last year they had the Navy SEAL that came in and shared his testimony and had a lot of guys come to Christ. The women have their Oikos event every year. I mean, it's a big deal, a big production. Last year, the guys brought in the manager for the Beatles, did a good job. And year before, I think it was AC Green wanted to have a free throw shooting contest with me. There have been a few more high profile. We can't afford some of the big guys. I asked about one guy. I won't even tell you who it is because it'll sound very critical. Well, one guy who's very prolific now in Christian circles, Christian conversations, and I said, let's get that guy. And he said, man, it could cost, up to $25,000. I said, really? I said, wow. Well, let's still try. Let's see. And it cost him $75,000 to get that guy for one hit, which we didn't do, by the way. So it's just out of our range. But there are always ways to bring very simple, they're not complicated, they're not overwhelmingly difficult to plan, but things that somebody in your oikos would come to a campus. Why? To expose them to the campus. One day they're going to be invited to a service. When they come to a Christian comedy night, and there are some amazing talents out there that could entertain believer, non-believer alike. I mean, we've had some of the greatest times doing that. Do we expect them to pray to receive Christ after a comedy concert? No, we don't even share the gospel. It's not the point. But then, strategically, they are invited to a service and at least they have context. You mean I can sit in that same seat, in that same auditorium that doesn't even look like a church? Anyway, simplicity. If I were to ask you, could you explain in just a few minutes everything that your church is about? And some of you have so many systems and so many programs and so much stuff. It's just very complicated, and it becomes more complicated in time. Let's keep going, though, because we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's just keep going for now to number 3. The Oikos-centered church is a unified church. A unified church. Every church has a list of things, and on that list, well, the title of the list is this: you have to agree with us to be a part of this church. And it's just true. I mean, let's just be honest. Part of at least a section of that list is our doctrinal statement. These are the things we believe. And if you don't believe them, you're still welcome to attend the services, but you're not going to get very, very far because this is who we are. And then there are a whole lot of things that aren't listed in a constitution or listed on a doctrinal statement. They're just cultural realities that are what they are, and you don't have to be in the room very long to figure out, I don't fit here because I don't have that same mind. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a list. We have a list. What I'm telling you right now is this. The longer your list, the smaller your church. Because the more things you put out there as being a requirement to be a part of yours, the smaller the pool you're fishing in. Now, if I were to say to you, you know, your guys in your church, people in your church are going to get all excited when you present this material, and they're going to all start praying for their oikos, and probably 3 or 4 years from now, your church is going to be 5 or 6 times the size it is right now. You say, really? Yes, Pastor Karnak here, I can predict the future. That's what's going to happen. Is that what you want to see happen? And virtually everybody in these settings, in these seminars, in these conferences, yeah, we'd love to see that happen. Really? Do you know what kind of whack jobs are out there that are seeking Christ and they don't even know it? That are going to be invited by your church family at some point to attend? How many Zacchaeuses are out there that you're going to have to disciple? Think twice before you begin asking God for an increase. Because I will tell you this, I don't know what they're thinking. I just know it's not what you're thinking. So that's why you got to figure out what do you have to be welcome here, and keep that list down. And once you discover what that list is, this is the greatest challenge of ministry. Never, ever, ever add anything to the list. There are no constitutional amendments to that list. Keep it short, and man, put a padlock on it. You know, most things should not be on the list. Most theological issues should not be on the list. They shouldn't be. Because wonderful Christian people don't agree with you. Wonderful Christian people who are smarter than you do not agree with you. And you could be really smart. I bet I could find somebody smarter than you. It's not me. Probably not on this team. But I bet I can find somebody who doesn't agree with you and is as filled with the Holy Spirit as you are. And probably won more people to Christ in the last year than you have. And they don't agree with the thing that you think that makes you mad about what they think. Style issues. Shouldn't be on the list. Because whatever style you're all excited about, it's going to change anyway. I mean, you know, I tell people, you know, style shouldn't be on the list. I have a preference of style. And the older I get, the more I realize I'm a fuddy-duddy. I used to be, Jack and I 30 years ago, we sit down, you know, forgive me, Mark, we're at Del Taco. We're sitting down at Del Taco, and we're just, I know, I just lost him. But anyway, and we're talking, and we think we're hip, right? We're like the young kids on the block. We're pushing the envelope. We're making everybody go, whoa, that's out of the box. And now, you know what we are? I don't know, I don't think we should do that. Pet programs. You know, I'll just put it out there, whatever your pet program is, whatever your children's pet program, your youth pet program, your adult pet program, not part of the course, should not be on the list. It needs to be a short list. You know, that's one of the primary reasons why the church landscape is sprinkled with so many churches that don't grow. Even in large cities, even when you got millions of people living within 15 minutes of your site. And there's nothing wrong with a small church, by the way. 90% of the churches in the United States have 100 people attending or fewer every weekend. 90%. And there's nothing wrong with that, actually. Unless it's small because that particular group of believers are simply making it too difficult for people to come to Christ. Because their doggone list is too long. Now, I want to rightly handle the word of truth. And you know, if you've heard me teach, you know I can be almost as direct as I'm being with you today. I am very opinionated about the scriptures. I am very prophetic in the way I deliver the truth. It is not a pick and choose, you know, here are 4 options. My guys are going to be laughing. Usually it is, this is the next step for you to take. I mean, I could be that guy. I try not to be dogmatic unless the Bible is very clear, and when the Bible is more clear, I'm more dogmatic. The fact of the matter is, though, and you guys all have to admit this, the Bible is not that clear on very many things, which is why all those really smart people don't agree with us. You ever notice that the same Paul, who wrote with such passion and theological determination, also made quite a case for differences of opinion on what he called disputable matters? Those things that none of us probably are going to resolve because the church has been arguing about them for the last couple of thousand years. And Paul left room for those disputable matters. Why did he do that? Because he understood the mission of the church. He understood the objective of the church. And he was careful to leave room for all those differences of opinion, because he knew that if the church were going to be successful in our mission, we'd have to necessarily become increasingly diverse. You think you have a hard time maintaining doctrinal homogeneity now. Just wait till all those thousands of people that you're hoping will come. You'd be juggling more than you ever thought possible. This is what Paul said. I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree with one another in what you say, and that there may be no divisions among you, but that you may be perfectly united in mind and thought. And for most of us, that has historically meant, let's argue until we agree with everything. Because we have to be perfectly united in mind and thought. This woman, who I love more than anything in the whole world, sitting right back there for 33 years, 33 plus years, my wife, she still doesn't agree with me on everything. We are not perfectly united in mind and thought. If it means we have to agree on everything. I mean, how am I going to, if I can't do that with this beautiful creature, one person, I can't do it on our staff team. We can talk about all kinds of weird stuff. Really? You believe that? That's weird. And now we got thousands of people at High Desert Church. What am I going to do? Well, I think what Paul meant was not let's argue until we agree. I think what he meant is let's stop arguing because it doesn't matter that we don't agree. We got bigger fish to fry than this. One of you says, I follow Paul, another I follow Apollos, another I follow Cephas, another I follow Christ. Section in the new version of the book I call Podcasting Corinth. Who's your favorite pastor? That's the dude I follow. And it's interesting of these guys, Paul, Apollos, Cephas, of course Jesus, Paul is not, he's not even saying that any of them or their respective contingents in the church are teaching or are emphasizing or are otherwise doing anything wrong. The problem is that none of them recognize the incredible diversity that's bound to happen if the church is successful. Now, we're a very diverse church. By the way, this is the thing. He starts off in 1 Corinthians 1, talking about the value of being a unified congregation. And then he says in verse 17, if you don't come together, the cross of Christ will be emptied of its power. That's frightening to me, to think that the cross, symbolizing the greatest power in the universe, could be drained. The cross, drained of its power. Something sucks the power out of the cross. You know what it is? The church that can't get along with itself. For the sake of this discussion, let's just say we got everybody together and you are all representing different schools of thought and theology. Let's just say. And your job, because you're brilliant, you're articulate, you're a theological, mensa. And we're all in here because, the church has been divided for far too many centuries. Don't you agree? I think we just need to all argue and discuss and come to grips with what the issues are that separate the body of Christ so we can finally bring the body of Christ together. And so we start right down here in the front, and brother gets up and shares his particular view of certain elements of theology. Somebody else refutes that. We got going, this thing going back and forth. But we're not leaving this room. We're not leaving this room until we get this straightened out. I don't know how long it's going to take, but we do it. And maybe days or weeks or months or years from now, we finally, and we're tired, we're walking out of this building with a statement on what the Church of Jesus Christ believes about everything. Finally, the church agrees. Man, you guys are great. As we're walking out, guess who's walking in? Jesus. Jesus says, Can I see what you got? Yeah. Jesus takes it. Okay, reads the whole thing. Congratulations. Not only did you come together and agree on everything, you got every point correct down to the letter. Great cheer breaks out in the church. Wouldn't that be the day? You know, if that were to happen, which, by the way, it ain't going to happen, but if that were to happen, we would have accomplished nothing more than what will be accomplished anyway the second after we croak. Way to go. We could have got here a lot easier. If you know what I mean, and I think you do. You know, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be passionate about the word and have your own opinions. All I'm saying is this: can vying for doctrine of purity really be the purpose of the church? Debate can be helpful. It's even healthy. But when it moves onto the front burner, I don't know what to tell you. You can argue till the cows come home, and those 8 to 15 people whom God has supernaturally and strategically placed in your life are still on a rocket ship to hell. So what's the point when you consider the objective? All right, so we're a unified church. And by the way, God can use a lot of different churches. It's amazing to me that he uses charismatic churches. Guys are so out there. And he uses fundamentalist churches because they're like so. And he uses, I'm surprised he uses me because I'm really not that good at anything. But I will tell you what God will not use. Flat out will not use. A church that is not united. There you go. Number 3, united church. Number 4, has a sharp focus on our purpose. A few years ago, is that right? That's right. It's right there. A few years ago, we asked the church family this question: how much time can you give us? We want to prepare you to reach your 8 to 15. And I'm not talking about the time you spend with your 8 to 15. I'm not even talking about the time that you are spending in devotional time with the Lord. You're reading the Bible and praying or whatever. That's you. That's what you do. I'm talking about when you are on the High Desert Church campus and we are doing something with you, for you, to you, in order to prepare you to reach your Oikos. How much time are you going to give us? We surveyed the church. We did exit surveys. We had conversations. We actually asked them to fill in a blank and let us know. Think about it. Don't just do it flippantly, but think about it. How much time can you give us? And then we crunched the numbers and we came up with an average of 5 hours a week. That seemed to be a fair analysis of what the average parishioner at High Desert Church, who really is on board. I'm not talking about lightweights. There will be people who won't come 5 hours. I'm not talking about heavyweights. There will be people who will be camping at church, involved in every ministry you can think of. There's a few. I'm talking about the average person in the church, how much time they can give us to prepare them to change their world for Christ. They said 5. So the next question we asked was, what are we going to do for 5 hours? The question was not, what are we going to do with them for 6 hours? Why not? They're not going to be here for 6 hours. Do you see how much self-talk we do here? We sit around in meetings and we say, okay, let's start all these ministries. They told you 5 hours. They're driving the bus on this. These people are on board. These people love God. These people want to change their worlds. They also have lives. They also have jobs. They also have Little League. They also have, other family events and other things that they want to do outside of class, okay? They're giving you 5, bro. So figure it out. We sat down and we said we got 5 hours. We didn't come up with a 6-hour plan or a 7-hour plan or a 10-hour plan. Why not? Because that would have been stupid. They told us 5. Meaningful worship. We're going to have worship services if they come. It's up to us to make them meaningful. That sucked up about 90 minutes of the 5 hours. oh man, we're burning daylight here. You know, what are we going to do with all these programs? Cool your jets, bro, we're not done yet. Then we decided relationships was important. If you have a small group, they're going to have relationships. It's up to us to make them meaningful. How long does it take to have a small group? 2 hours. Well, 2 hours plus an hour and a half, that's 3.5. We're down to, I have 90 minutes left. I have 90 minutes of your attention left. After I have you sit in an auditorium for a meaningful worship service, and then you're sitting in a meaningful small group developing relationships, I got 90 minutes. That's it. What are we going to do? Oh, yeah, you got spiritual gifts, right? Oh, man, what a bummer. Got to use those, right? We got to find some time for spiritual gifts. You know what that sucked up? The entire 90 minutes we had left. People say you only do 3 things. Yeah, you should only do 3 things. Unless people are giving you more than they're giving us. They only give us 5. So let me ask you the question. How many hours do the people in your church give you? You say, I don't know. Well, dude, you better find out. Because you're spending money you could save. You're spending time you could save. You're hiring people you probably don't need to hire. Except for the ones who are here today, of course. They're necessary. What I'm saying is that how do you even begin ministry without knowing how much time people are going to give you? What does that have to do with oikocentricity? Sharp focus on our purpose. Because once you have 5 hours, that's the question you ask. How can we spend this time the most wisely to reach their 8 to 15? And that's a very good question. We call it a 5-hour box. You know what happens when you try to stuff too much stuff? Yes, it's a verb and a noun. You try to stuff too much stuff, that's why they call it stuff. You're stuffing it into the box. Just think of a cardboard packing box. So you fill it up. We filled it up with meaningful worship, meaningful relationship, meaningful roles. Oh, but we want to do more stuff. So you open up the box, start shoving it in. What happens to the sides of the box? They kind of start puffing out, right? And if you keep shoving stuff in, what happens to the box at all? It explodes. It rips. It breaks. Oh, and by the way, boxes aren't the only things that break. People break too. And they burn out. They become discouraged. You know, Jesus came to accomplish a very specific job. He came to seek and to save losers like us. People who were lost. You say, am I a loser? You were lost by definition. See, I hope that's okay. You were lost. That's a form of the word loser. He didn't come to feed people. He didn't come to heal people. Now, did he feed people? Yes, because he loved them. Did he heal them? Yes, because he loved them. Couldn't help himself, man. He was Jesus, okay? But when he took off, and I mean when he took off, and the disciples are going, what are we going to do now? He took off because he was what? He was done with a very specific purpose that he came to fulfill. Do you know when Jesus left, there were still a lot of hungry people holding their empty dishes up? Still a lot of sick people hoping to get healing? Still a lot of dead people who could have used a resurrection. And he left. How rude. Why? He came to do what only he could do. That's why we call Easter week the Passion Week. That was his 5%. If Jesus doesn't get that done, it ain't getting done. And he did. He was all about this focus, you guys. It was all about focus. You know, what did he say? You know, woman, my time has not yet come. Focus. Of course, he bent the rules a little bit for mom. And it shouldn't surprise us that focus becomes a primary building block of the church's mission. We have to be incredibly focused. He calls us all to that. You know, when the question is asked, how big a church do you have? At High Desert Church. How big is High Desert Church? They say, well, we got 150,000 people. 150,000 people, that would make you like almost the largest church in the world, certainly the largest church in North America. I actually spoke to a church in Seoul, 45,000 people, every weekend at that church. Largest churches in the world are all in one city. It's crazy. So how big is High Desert Church? Well, it must be a Korean church. It's 150,000 people. Say, you really got 150,000? Yeah, 150. You have 150,000 people. Well, 138,000 don't attend yet. but it's because of the 138,000 that the 12,000 who do attend wake up every day. You know, Pastor Tom, what's next after Oikos? I don't know, Jesus, what's next after saving the lost? We get to go home. And we've been at war for a long time. Oikos-centric church led by humble leaders. Humble leaders. A Nordstrom department store, I always use their little diagram as inspirational to me. You know, when we think about structural charts. Baby, can I pull this over now? She's not listening, is she? No, it's all right. We think of structural charts, we think of pyramids, right? You have this in your notes, in your outline. We think of, for example, any corporate, well, we talk about your church, you know, you talk about your senior pastor, you know, little star boy there. And then down here you got the staff, you know, and then you got your lay leadership. And then you've got your volunteers. And then you've got your department heads. And then you've got, you know, the people who attend. We'll just say, you know, the congregation. You know, you look at your Constitution, it's probably not similarly to that because we've taken our lines from corporate America. And that's the way it is in corporate America. Here you have like the CEO, and you got the board of directors, and then, you know, in a department store chain, then you'd have store managers, and then, or maybe district managers, and then store managers, and then department managers, and then you got employees, right? You know, bottom here, got employees, and that's corporate USA. The cool thing about Nordstrom's is they did something a little different, and maybe you're familiar with this, but this is what Nordstrom's did. They actually turned the pyramid upside down, and they said this. They said, our CEO is going to be at the bottom of the pyramid, and his job or her job is to facilitate and to resource everybody who is serving under them and essentially ministering, to use theological terms or biblical terms, ministering to them in such a way as that they can be successful in their lives. So now you got the board here, board of directors. And the board of directors have a job. Their job is to resource and to facilitate all of the district managers so that the district managers can be successful. Their job is to resource and facilitate the mission of the store managers so that they can be successful in their mission, as can the now department managers and the employees. Funny thing is, they didn't stop there. They said that way, all of us can work together to service the most important people in our industry, which are who? Customers. Nordstrom has probably the greatest customer service policies, the most generous customer service policies in the world. We don't shop there because we can't afford to, but they do have the best restrooms in the mall. So that's why we're always, am I right? We're always cruising through Nordstrom's pretending we're buying something just so we can get to the restroom. So anyway, I don't know where that fits on the chart. The funny thing about it is, you know, it happens that way. It happens that way in relationship to the church. When I think about the church, you know, and I think about the structure of the church, so often, who are we elevating? Well, we're elevating the leaders. Of course, we got the conferences, and we got the books and the seminars and the resources, and we got the podcast because it's all about the leaders. And then everybody kind of follows suit because they're worshiping that way. And then, of course, we come to Jesus being the head of the church, and as the head of the church, and if the pastor or the church leader is like at the top of the pyramid, where's Jesus? Well, he's theologically, it would be accurate to say he's head of the church. We've got to put him at the very top, right? That would make sense. Unless you read his vision statement for Jesus Corp. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, that who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in obedience as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And Jesus said, if you want to be great in the kingdom of God, what do you have to do? You have to become the what? The servant of all. In the Christian church, Jesus is like so down here. That's why it works so doggone well. Why 2,000 years later, in a world of 7 billion people, 1 out of every 10 follows him. It's all about humility. And while most of us haven't been raised that way, it certainly is the way that we have to proceed. Somewhere along the way, we decided it's more important to elevate church leaders than to elevate the lost. Somewhere it happened. I don't know where. Maybe I was a part of it. Researchers have tried to analyze why identifying the celebrity of others is so important to us. And maybe it's because we don't feel important enough. And so we identify with someone who is, and that makes us feel better about who we are because we're on their team. We wish we could sing well, but we can't. So we buy the CDs of the superstar who has the voice we wish we had. Or we can't hit baseballs 400 feet, but we can root for someone who can. Someone who can do what we wish we could. In fact, psychologists call it social identity theory. And maybe as believers, we don't feel like we could ever make much of a difference for the kingdom. So what do? We cheer for someone who we believe can. And I am of Paul. And I am of Apollos. And I am of Cephas. I am of the shaker and the mover du jour. That really is making a difference. And we're pointing a direction that is unhealthy for the church. There are a lot of church leaders who are more gifted than Tom Mercer, that's for darn sure. And that means the churches they lead will potentially be larger than HDC. Many others in pastoral leadership are less gifted than I am, which means that the chances are they're going to be leading and teaching and presenting to smaller groups of people. And that's totally up to the Lord, because He is the one who gives us whatever gifts He gives us. We are all what we are. And we have to simply seek to honor Christ with inside of that box that He puts us. Let's say that highly gifted Pastor A has a big leadership box, a big teaching box. Moderately Pastor B has a little bit smaller box, and the less gifted Pastor C has a smaller box still. Which one of these guys is the most faithful? I don't know yet. Because how big the box is determined by God. He's the one that gives the gifts. Now, A would enjoy a larger response than B, and B a larger response than C. But all three would enjoy a significant response over time. Gonna push that away? Thanks, bro. Send Cheryl next time. But they would all enjoy a significant response over time. So the expectations of impact for any ministry emphasis has to consider the potential box of a leadership's gift set or of the leadership team's gift set. And the church you lead is probably not going to enjoy explosive growth no matter what. And I shared this earlier. Only way you can do that is to fire yourself and have them hire a better preacher. And that's not to say that you're not gifted. It's not to say that you're not anointed. It's certainly not to say that you're called to lead the church, but the fact is the only churches that enjoy explosive growth are the ones led by communicators whose leadership gifts are off the charts. And it's not that they're more faithful than you. They're more gifted than you. And again, that's not your call. Jesus just decided to give some church leaders more influence than he gave others. You ask me why? I don't know. And that's not even my problem to know. And that's one of the primary reasons I shared a minute ago that 90% of the world's churches are led or are smaller than 100 in attendance each weekend, and that's because virtually all churches are led by average gifted pastors. But whether or not our gift range is fully realized, and that's really what this is the key to. God gives you the box. What you do inside that box is up to you. And maximizing the bang for the buck that Jesus placed in your life is your call. The decisions that you make, the systems that you build, strategically the challenge that you provide. Or as the Apostle Paul wrote to Timothy, fan into flame that gift that God has given you through the laying on of my hands. That's 2 Timothy 1:6. And it's okay to be as faithful and have a smaller impact, because that's just the way the Lord has organized his church. Now in Korea, prior to speaking at a church there, I've been there 5 times. 5 times? 6 times? 5 times. I've been there 5 times. I thought the first time I would go, I was invited by actually Charles Arnn. When I started my relationship with Charles, he was hooked up with a guy in Korea who brought guys over for different seminars and conferences, and Charles had read the book, shared it with Steve Kim, and so they started bringing me over to Korea. Every time I went to Korea, I thought it was the only time I was going to go or the last time I was going to go. And we just keep going. This last year was the first year in the last 6 years that we didn't go over there. But anyway, I'm talking to Steve, and we're driving from our hotel to this church where I'm going to present on this principle, on the Oikos principle. And he says, now let me tell you something about the pastor of the church. I say, okay, broken English. He said, he is the 8th most influential pastor in Korea. I said, oh, okay, the 8th? Wow, it's pretty impressive, Steve. I kind of was taken aback by it. We go to the next guy. He's the 13th most influential pastor in Korea. Next guy, he's the 3rd most influential pastor in Korea. I said, finally, do you guys have a pastor fantasy league here? What's going on? I don't really understand. I mean, how sad that a culture's vanity has so impacted the Korean church. And he told me, he said, Koreans don't like to settle for second place. They're all trying to become the most whatever it is. And I thought, man, what a sad thing. Even pastors are doing that. So I come home from that trip. Never forget this. I go to my office, and there's a magazine sitting on my desk. The top 10 most influential pastors in the United States. I thought, wow. How sad is that? Actually. The church is a strategy. It's not an objective. Jesus' goal was not to build the church, but save the lost. And if this is all about just growing a local church, then every church's goal has to be to hire the most gifted pastor they can, that their budget can afford. Thereby, that gives them a better shot of landing more people who are looking for a new church home. Here's the question. What would you prefer this year? Option A, 200 transferred believers. Because you're just such an incredible teacher, we're going to empty out a few little churches, and you're going to have to go to 2 services this year, Matt. In this room, you're going to 200 more people than you've ever had before. That's option A, or 3 converted non-believers. Now, I know if I asked you the question right now, raise your hand, which I'm not going to do. You're all going to say, oh, we want 3 converted. Wait a minute. Let's just check ourselves for a minute. You're going to get a raise with option A. You're going to be on the stage at your denomination's next national meeting with option A. Option B, I don't think anybody in the world is going to notice that. I don't know, except for maybe the 127,500 people that are coming down the pike. They might notice that. And by the way, that would be times 3. What would that be, like 500,000 people over the next 4 generations? All I'm saying, if you want your church to grow really fast, then, that's one thing. But we've been at this for 30 years, and that's why we say oikocentric ministry, it requires discipline. It's a prolonged process. It is a marathon. Is that where it is in your outline? It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay, number 6. We're getting there. Only 6 and 7 and we'll be done. Oikocentric church led by disciplined leaders. Disciplined leaders. Now, why is it disciplined leaders? Because Jim Collins told us what? Good is the enemy of what? Good is the enemy of great. We settle for good because we're not disciplined. How many good programs can you introduce to your church this year? They're out there. I mean, remember, we're better resourced than at any other time in church history. Just go online and Google the top 10 most impactful programs for your church. And you'll get a lot of good ones, but you'll miss out on the greatest opportunity of all. Because people can't do everything. It's focus. You see, you can't afford to offer Christ Church too many good things to do. Otherwise, we never get around to doing anything great. One of the great challenges here at HTC is to avoid what we call program creep. And you guys, this will happen. It will happen in everybody's area of ministry. You'll just add stuff and more and more and more. And this is the way it works. Hey, Pastor, do you have an available room on Tuesday evening? Just a few of us need a room to meet. That sounds innocent enough. And until a few months later, since the group's getting a bit larger, can we use a microphone? Just show us how to use it. We'll be fine. We don't need any help. That sounds a little more involved, but still rather innocent. A few months later, can we use a room next to us since it's not also being used? We need to have a place to have some child care. We'll arrange for our own child care, don't worry, but we just need a place for the kids. And then a few months later, some of our moms can't afford child care. Can we get a budget line to pay for just a part of it or to offset the cost for some of our more needy families? Doesn't that sound great? It's called program creep. Let me play prophet for a minute. In a few years, you're going to have a full-blown program that wasn't even part of your vision. Is what it is. Why? Now, what's the problem? Discipline. People call the church. George will laugh at this. We have these meetings. People call the church. Your room's not being used. That room is not being used on Thursday nights. Can we use it? Sorry, I can't let you use it. Well, who else is using it? Nobody. Well, why can't we use it? Just can't. I don't know what to say. You just can't. Why? Because we know the future. And it's called major distraction. And we got things popping up all the time, you guys. Sometimes people come up after a service. They'll say, I was involved in a real cool ministry at my prior church. I would like to be involved in that here. I'm really sorry, but you're probably not going to be involved in that here. Well, why not? Well, because we do 3 things. But we only have 5 hours. Well, what if somebody else can give us, maybe there's a group. Maybe there's a group or somebody give us 6 hours or 7 hours or 8 hours. Yeah, but we don't want them to. Because they have an oikos, see? They need to spend time with, at some point, I remember when we canceled our Sunday night service. Just canceled. It was one of the best things we ever had. Honestly. We just canceled it. Why? Because people had no time to interact with their oikos. Sunday night was a great time. It was the best time. They told us it was the best time. Okay, you can have Sunday night. Popularity and growth of a ministry may not be good enough reasons to maintain it. I can't even begin to explain to you how many ministries we canceled that were successful in the sense that they were highly attended and very popular in the church. So, one of the most valuable exercises our team goes through each year is developing our not-to-do list. And we'll have a meeting, and this is what the meeting is full of. What crept into our program this year that we better get rid of, or else it's going to grow up and be a monster that we don't even want to mess with? And we just have to go down the list of everything that we do and say, that's not part of our strategic vision. We can't do it. And you know what that means? You know what that requires? It requires hurtful conversations. That's what it requires. It requires telling people no. It's called discipline. An oikocentric church is a disciplined church. Now remember, this morning you raised your hand and you promised me you wouldn't be mad at me. So hold to your promise, you guys, because I'm losing some of you, I can tell. I've made it clear with many pastors, this thing with the economy is a problem. We have a problem. Over the last couple of years, it's kind of leveled out, but there were a number of years in succession where we had to cut $1 million out of our annual budget and still minister to an extra 1,000 people. Simply because it's what happened. The church continued to grow, but the giving went down. The people kept coming, the giving went down. So we just had to keep cutting back. Now, the last couple of years, it's been a little better, and we're thankful for that. But when I would talk to our team, and when I talk to other pastors, say, the money's really bad. Dude, this is the best opportunity you've ever had. To what? To start focusing in on the ministries that are most meaningful. One of the worst things that can happen to a church is they have too much money to spend because they spend it on things that are a distraction of the church family. Actually hurting the overall mission by saying, let's start this ministry and this program and that program. One of our mantras at HTC, do fewer things better. If we have more money next year, which I am praying we do, we may add staff, whatever we may do, it will be to make what we do right now exponentially more effective. We are not looking to add anything. Why? I got 5 hours. That's it. Number 7, oikocentric church, a partnership between the leadership and the laity. There is the assumption that we are a secret church, and that's just because Oikos is our banner. People pick up the book, or they read about the church, or they hear, the purpose statement, or they talk to one of the leaders, and immediately they think it's all about seeker. Just bring people into the family of God. And you have today, I hope, heard an explanation that extends well beyond evangelism. But I don't want to be a seeker church. Actually, we grew up in a believer's church. I did. I grew up in a believer's church where the church was more for believers and ministry was supposed to happen out there. Not in here, out there. Equip everybody in here, they'll do all the work out there. That would be great, except it didn't work, which is why churches like that didn't grow unless they had what? An enormously gifted teacher or an enormously gifted leader. What was the reason for the seeker movement? The believers' church wasn't reaching people. So the seeker movement would have never even happened had the believers' church worked out okay. But we don't want to be a seeker church. We're not here just to have services that are evangelistic and bring people into the family of God on the weekend. When we preach to Christians. Every message, you know this, if you've heard our messages, it's to believers. In fact, at the end of the message, we hope people who are sitting out there as non-Christians, we hope they're thinking, man, I'm missing out on something. Because this is not only truthful and helpful, it's enjoyable. I want to be like those guys. And maybe you have heard something today that has stimulated your thinking about the possibility of giving your heart to Christ. Well, if you want to, A, B, C. Admit that you're a sinner. You need a Savior. Believe that Jesus is the only Savior that God provides the world and choose to place your faith in his very capable, albeit nail-scarred hands today. See, you know what we are? We're a partnership. It's not about just personal growth. It's not about just personal mission. It's a balance between the two where I am able to say to a church family, I'll do my part if you'll do yours. And I think far too many of us have said, you do your part and we're going to still keep doing everything we've always been doing. I'll be disciplined if you will be. If you will live a disciplined life, I will lead a disciplined budget. I will lead a disciplined structure. I will partner with you in that area of discipline. If you will humble yourself before God, I will humble myself as your leader. I mean, let's make this a partnership. And that's why we're not necessarily looking for seekers or believers. We just want partners to fulfill the mission, the objective.